Good afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday, March 30th. How the heck is it March 30th? I know. I get how time works, but still, it seems to be flying. 2022 at 3 o'clock p.m., and that means it's time for Women in Business. I'm starting right on the dot today because this is going to be a slightly shorter show than normal. I need to be off at about 3:45 because I am recording another show with someone at 4, a guest who couldn't be on the live show because she had a schedule conflict. So we're going to record a show and you all will see that at a later date. But I'm really excited. This guest is someone that I've wanted for quite a while. So before we get started with today's topic, a few things that I want to mention. First of all, I'm promoting the sheshouldrun.org website every time I do a show now, just because I think this is such a great informational portal and encouragement for women to run for office on the state, local, and federal level. It gives you a lot of information. If you're not interested in running for office yourself, it gives you opportunities to support people who are running, ways to support people who are running. So I think most of us would agree that getting more women in office is a very important thing. And this is one way that we can help do that. So sheshouldrun.org, you should definitely check that out. The other thing that I'm kind of giving a promo to this week is promocares.org is doing their Ukraine for Good event. This is where you can find that if you want to donate. I donated myself. I would highly recommend doing it. Everything is going to feed kids and help clothe and keep them warm and give them blankets and things in the Ukraine, which I think is a very, very humanitarian effort and it should be supported. So, and promocares.org is also the organization that did the Sleep In for Good to promote mental health. They've done other things. They raise a lot of money for good charitable causes. So they're definitely a good organization to support. Go to promocares.org for good events to learn more about Ukraine for Good. So what we are talking about today is trauma and how, when, and why to talk about it, or why, when, and how, as I put in the description. And some of you might be going, okay, really, another one of these? Seriously? I mean, do we need to talk about this stuff all the time? And I think, yes, we do, partly because we don't talk about this stuff all the time. A lot of people have been taught you don't talk about bad things that happen to you, or it's not nice to talk about them, or people don't want to hear that, so you should just keep it all to yourself. And in some cases, that's not necessarily wrong. I mean, I think you have to be selective about who you talk to about traumas in your life because not everyone's going to be receptive or supportive or caring about it. But I think we need to normalize talking about things, talking about depression, talking about mental illness of some kind, talking about sexual abuse, talking about spousal abuse or consequences of divorce or whatever it is. We need to normalize that these things happen to people and they're part of their lives and they should be discussed, which is why I'm having this discussion here with you today. And I do want to say real quick, and I think I did say this already, but this is going to be a little shorter, just so you know, probably going to go about 45 minutes today, which is a little less time than I normally do. But like I said, there are other things that need to happen, and the guest that I'm going to be recording with is definitely worth having a slightly shorter show today. So, Tanya is here. Hello, Tanya. Nice to see you. Thank you for being here. Let's start off today with why you might want to talk about whatever trauma is in your life or whatever thing you're dealing with, whether it's chronic illness or mental illness or the aftermath of sexual abuse or the aftermath of spousal abuse or the aftermath of emotional abuse or whatever it is. Why would you want to talk about this? First reason, one word, help. And help could be in a couple of areas. One reason to talk about this stuff is because there may be people who are going through similar situations to what you went through, and they might be in the part of their path where they're looking around and going, this is hard and it's painful and it hurts and people don't care. And I'm not sure that I want to do this or can do this. Now, when people are at that stage, what can often be helpful for them is hearing from someone who has done what they've done. Not exactly, but closely enough that there are parallels. And so if you are in the stages of working to recover from something that happened to you, hearing from someone who's further along the path who can say, you know what, I was at that place too, and I made it through, and now I'm at this place and I'm happy and things are good, can be enormously beneficial. So, one reason to talk about what's happened to you is that you can help people who are still dealing with similar situations who maybe are not as far along in their process as you are. And you can give them some hope. You can maybe give them some coping tools that they can use. You can tell them the things that you encountered that maybe they're going to encounter. You can just give them an example of, okay, here's someone who is in a similar situation and came through it and got to the other side and is now visibly happier doing what they love. So that's one option. The other thing and the other reason in the help category that you want to talk about your traumas and why you would talk about your traumas is because talking is one of the ways that you heal from what happened to you, whatever that might be, whether it's with a therapist, whether it's with somebody who's been through it already, whether it's in a journal or on a show like this, or whatever it is. Talking is a way of processing. It's a way of dealing with emotions. It's a way of making connections for maybe you have coping mechanisms that you developed to get through whatever you were dealing with, and they don't serve you anymore, but you need to talk about it a little bit so you can figure out that, gee, maybe I need to stop doing these things because this doesn't necessarily work anymore. So talking can have a lot of helpful benefits for other people and for you. And I think this kind of societal stigma that says you shouldn't talk about these things in public, or if you do talk about them, it should only be with your therapist, or it should only be with, your best friend or whatever it is. These things are part of your life. They're part of what shaped you into the person that you are. So why are some things allowable and other things not? And I also don't like, honestly, the whole idea of, especially in the cases of spousal abuse or sexual abuse or things like that, there's kind of this perception is maybe the word I want, or kind of this assumption of guilt. Like you shouldn't talk about it because you made it happen or you caused it in some way or you're culpable in some way for the things that happened to you. And I think that's annoying and awful and not something that just isn't what you want to do. So sorry, my system went a little nuts here. I think we're good now, though. All right. So the first thing to talk about is the first reason, well, your first why when you're talking about trauma is because it'll help. So I think that's the first thing you want to do. The second reason to talk about your trauma is what I was talking about earlier, which is support. If you know somebody who's going through something and it's similar to something you went through, sometimes it's helpful for you to be able to say, you know what, I went through X thing, which is similar to what you did. And here's what I learned, or here's what I found helped. And I want to make the note here, and I'll come back to this point later. But when you are talking to someone else who is dealing with their own traumas about your traumas, it's not a competition. It's not about who had it worse. It's not about being smug about the fact that you made it through. It's I'm relaying this to you because I see that you're in a situation that I can identify with, and I want to support you as you're going through it. That's the reason. So, and like I said, we'll talk about this all later, but please make sure if you're talking to someone else who is going through a trauma, do it in a way that is supportive, not in a way that is trying to make yourself look like a hero or trying to emphasize how much worse what you went through was what they went through. There's no value to that. It doesn't help them. It doesn't help you. Just don't do it. That's my little emphasis there. Make others feel less alone. This is another reason why you should talk about your traumas, because there is this stigma in the world of you shouldn't talk about it. It's not nice. I remember when I reported the teacher that molested me, my mother told me, you shouldn't talk about it. I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you talked about it. And leaving aside all the complicated emotions that came with that, she was reacting from a cultural standard that said, this isn't nice. You shouldn't talk about this. You shouldn't let people know. What if people find out? What are they going to think? And granted, some of the what are people going to think was what are they going to think of my parents as parents? And what are they going to think of the fact that this was allowed to happen? Blah, blah, blah. So there was some, I guess, image protection that was going on there. And that's, whatever it is. But I remember at the time feeling like I was the only one in the world that had ever been through this. And internet was around, but this was a while back. So it wasn't nearly as prevalent as it is now. And I would have given anything to have someone like me back then who has said, you know what, we need to talk about this stuff. And you shouldn't be ashamed of it. And you shouldn't feel like you're less than. And you shouldn't feel like you did something wrong. You're standing up for yourself. You are letting, you're putting someone who is a predator in a place where he can't hurt anyone else. This is a good thing. I didn't get a lot of that. I got a lot of, why are you talking about this? So I felt really, really alone, honestly. And that's a lot of the reason that I talk about the things that I talk about, is because I remember what it's like to feel that alone. I remember what it's like to feel like there's nobody on your side. And strangely enough, even if it's somebody you don't know and may never know and may never see in person, just hearing that there are other people that have gone through this stuff makes you feel like, okay, I have a tribe, there's a group. And hearing that there are people who have gone through what you're going through and made it through to the other side. Because I got to say, when the whole prosecution part of this was going on, the whole prosecution part of my situation was going on, and I was being threatened, and I had to get a lawyer, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't know how I was going to pay for any of it. And I felt very accused when I was essentially, and I hate this word, but it's the only word that really fits, I was the victim. I really felt, I didn't feel like there was anywhere to turn. So making others feel less alone is a huge reason to talk about whatever traumas you've been through, because there now is this thing called the internet where people can Google and find other people who have had similar experiences. And that makes such a difference, honestly, especially if you're not getting support from your friends and family, which can happen. So, if you've been through a situation, let people know. And Jeff says, I think a lot of us feel alone in the beginning, but as we get older and realize that we can talk to other people about it, it's amazing to see how many people have the same or similar stories. And I will totally agree with that, Jeff. I think finding that there are other people that went through things that you also experienced can be really, really beneficial. It makes you feel like it's maybe a sad and kind of a tribe you don't want to be a part of, but it makes you feel like you have a tribe. Like there's people like you who are dealing with the same kind of pain and damage that you're dealing with. So I totally agree with that. And that is something, the more that you talk about it, the more you find out that there are other people who have similar experiences. And I got to say, feeling less alone is awesome, whether it's you're dealing with a mental illness, or you're dealing with a chronic illness, or you're dealing with ADHD or some kind of neurotypical issues, or whatever it is, or non-neurotypical issues. I guess my language is going crazy here, but you know what I mean. Um, so make other people feel less alone. I think that's a huge reason to talk about these things. And the last one is just to normalize talking about the stuff that makes us uncomfortable, because we don't do it, because the instinct or the edict is, don't talk about it. Keep it quiet. People don't want to know about this, or they're going to think you're bad or wrong or damaged or injured or something. Or they're going to think that you're just looking for sympathy, or you want a pat on the head for how amazing you are that you got through this. Normalize talking. Normalize telling people about this stuff. It matters. It matters. The more of us that talk about these things, and the more of us that say, yes, me too, when someone else talks about these things, the more normal it's going to be. And that could be, it doesn't even have to be your trauma necessarily. I mean, parents that are raising kids with issues, talk about it. Talk about how hard it is. Talk about how sad it is. Talk about the institutions that don't help you. Talk about the things that do help you. Get the information out there. The more of us that talk about these things, the more of us that make ourselves vulnerable, the more of us that put out there things that maybe are painful or sad or hurt us, and let people see that, the more that becomes part of the conversation, just as a matter of course. Honestly, when I started talking about this stuff, which was not as soon as I wish I had, there were people who said to me, and there are still people who say to me, why do you talk about this stuff? And I've had people say to me, well, you're just looking for sympathy, or, well, you want us to tell you how amazing you are. You know what? I don't care if you think I'm amazing or not, honestly. And I really don't give a rat's ass if you feel sympathetic for me. Shit happened. It is what it is. It doesn't matter to me if you feel bad for me about it, or if you admire me because I got through it, or whatever it is. I'm talking about it because we should be talking about these things. And I feel like I'm being very empathetic right now, because I'm just like, we should be talking about this stuff. And people who do talk about it aren't doing it because they're looking for something. And okay, there are people who do. There are people who have made a career out of being a victim. I don't necessarily love that. I think everybody deals with their trauma in their own way. But I'm just talking about it because I think we should be talking about it. I'm talking about the things that happen to me, whatever they may be, because we don't talk about it. We don't talk about depression and people die. We don't talk about sexual abuse and more sexual abuse happens. We don't talk about spousal abuse, and women and men get trapped in situations that are harmful and painful. And there are children that are collateral damage in those situations, because we don't talk about these things, because we don't talk about the signs, because we don't talk about what you should look out for, because we don't talk about the aftermath and the pain and the damage that can happen. So we need to normalize talking about this stuff, and not in a poor me way, not in a my life is ruined way, just in a, hey, here's this thing that happened to me. Here's the results of it. Here's what I did to overcome whatever challenges came as a result of that thing. And here's where I am now. And here's why I'm talking to you. Simple as that. And I'm going to keep talking about this stuff. And eventually, if people get tired of it, they won't listen anymore, I guess. But, that's kind of how it is. So, next thing, when do you talk about things that were traumatic in your life? When you're comfortable talking. Some people may never be. And I don't think that's wrong. It's your trauma, it's your choice. I'm not saying everybody has to talk about their trauma or their damage. I'm not saying you should necessarily talk about your trauma or your damage. So when you're comfortable talking, for some people that might be a week or a month. For some people, it might be years. For some people, it might be never. And I also want to define comfortable talking, because there are some people who just aren't comfortable talking about anything. They don't feel comfortable airing their thoughts in public. And if they don't, they don't. And that's fine. But when you're comfortable talking usually means when you're far enough along the path of healing that you understand what happened and you can draw some useful information and conclusions from it. Now, again, talking about something because you want everybody to perceive you as a victim, or talking about something because you want everybody to say, oh, that's so awful, you were treated so poorly, and vindicate you for feeling badly about what happened to you. There's maybe value in that. I don't particularly think so, but I guess that's up to the individual. But in my case, I think when you're comfortable talking also means when you understand the consequences of what happened to you, when you understand what the results were, when you understand how you've gotten over whatever coping mechanisms or damage that occurred or whatever it was, and when you have something positive and useful to say. That's when I think you need to start talking about it. Now, that's not to say when you go to a therapist, you're going for a specific reason. You're going for help. When you talk to your closest friends about it, you could be looking for sympathy or support or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're doing something like this, or when you're talking on a wider stage about it, then I think you have to be comfortable with it. And I think you have to have something more to say than this thing happened to me. Again, my theory, other people may disagree with me. They may say I'm full of crap. That's fine. I'm not really worried about that. But the basic answer for me to the question, when should I start talking about my trauma, is when you're comfortable with doing it. And also when it's safe. And this sounds like a kind of crazy thing, but it really isn't. I didn't start talking about a lot of stuff that happened to me until I had gotten some help to process what had happened to me and what it meant in my life and what damage it had left. And that meant dealing with people who supported me and people who didn't. It meant letting go of some relationships with people who really should have supported me and didn't. Well, okay, that's a judgment call. People who didn't support me, let's just put it that way. And it also meant getting to a place where mentally my health was good enough. I wasn't dealing with depression. I wasn't scared I was going to kill myself. I wasn't worried about suicidal ideation. I wasn't really necessarily worried about having another clinical depression. And if those things did happen, I had tools and resources to make sure that it wasn't a dire situation. So when it's safe, if you're talking about spousal abuse or talking about having endured spousal abuse, then you don't want to talk about it until you're out of that situation and you're sure that the person that was abusing you can't abuse you anymore. You're sure that you're protected. If you're talking about sexual abuse, you want to make sure you've dealt with the consequences of whatever happened. You want to make sure the abuser has no access to you. You know, if you're talking about mental health issues or chronic illness or whatever, you want to make sure that emotionally and physically you are in a position to deal with whatever might come up and that you have a support system in place. This is all, you know, when it's safe, again, this is the kind of subjective criteria. When it's safe is going to be different for every person. But I think it's important to be aware that you need to be sure that you're safe and protected, both emotionally, mentally, and physically, before you start talking about the things that happen to you. That's, it's one of those things that when I say it, I feel like, gosh, that's awfully obvious, but I don't know if it is. So that's why I'm saying it, because I know there are people who think that part of their healing has to be talking. And I think talking to a therapist or talking to a trusted friend in a one-on-one situation, or talking in group therapy where it's monitored and mediated, is a little different situation than doing something like this. So you need to be aware of your safety, and you need to make that a priority. And honestly, when do you talk about it? When you're ready. And there's no calendar for that. And there's no, you should be ready at this time or you should be ready at that time. You're ready when you're ready. And some people may be ready in a year or 6 months. Some people may be ready in 5 years. Some people may never be ready. And that's personal choice. And there's no law that says you have to talk about what happened to you. I think at minimum, it's beneficial to talk to a professional about what happened to you if it's something that was traumatic. If you have PTSD, if you're dealing with, sexual abuse, physical abuse, whatever it is, I think that you should at minimum talk to a professional who can help you deal with the consequences of whatever happened. But that's up to you. You're the only one who can decide when you're ready. For me, I had a lot of guilt for a while because I felt like I should have reported the teacher who molested me a lot sooner than I did. Because he had told me that he had his eye on other people. And because I didn't report him sooner, he was able to then molest others. That's something that I can't say I've necessarily made my peace with, because I don't think that's the right way to put it. That's something that I've accepted, that I wish that I had been able to do it sooner, but it wasn't something that I was able to do. And the reason was I wasn't ready. I didn't have a support system on my side. My mental health was not that good. Had I reported him sooner than I did, I might not be here talking to you now, because I don't think that would have gone well. Let's put it that way. So you have to, obviously, the first thing you always want to do in any situation where you're talking about your trauma, where you're dealing with your trauma, where you're thinking, whatever it is, you want to look after yourself. You need to protect yourself, especially since a lot of traumas are caused by other people not protecting you or looking out for you. So you want to be sure you look out for you and you treat yourself as though you're important and you matter and you are number one. And once that's done, then you can look at everything and say, okay, I'm ready to talk about this with a therapist. I'm ready to talk about this with my significant other. I'm ready to talk about this with my family. I'm ready to talk about this on a podcast, whatever it is. And like I said, for everybody, that's going to be different. And well, thank you, Eric. Eric says, thanks for talking about these tough subjects out in the open. It's no small thing to take on. Honestly, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. But I think the reason that I do this as much as I do is because there are a lot of people who are still saying don't. And I have some residual anger from people who told me at the time when I was dealing with my traumas initially that I shouldn't. And there's nothing that feels worse than people who are supposed to care about you and who are supposed to love you and want the best for you telling you not to take care of yourself. Okay, there are probably worse things, but it's painful. Let's put it that way. And that's one of the messages that when you're ready also is when you're ready means having a support system that's going to back you up. Because I ain't going to lie, talking about this stuff is hard. I've done it for a long time. I'm fairly habituated to it now. I also know what I'm willing to talk about and what I'm not willing to talk about. There are some things that I'm not really willing to talk about, but you have to figure out those parameters for yourself. And it's not, you don't owe anybody anything. I want to make that clear too. Your trauma is yours. If you don't want to talk to anybody about it, don't. It's your trauma. You make the choice. But if you decide that you're going to, make sure that you have a good support system, your mental health is in a good place, you know what the consequences could be, you understand it, you understand who may not support you, and you've made your peace with that, whatever it might be. You know, there are a lot of factors that go into this. Cindy says, it's your platform. You can talk about whatever you want. You might just open someone's eyes and help them. And that's actually part of the reason that I do this, Cindy, is I kind of hope that maybe there is somebody out there who needs to hear this, and somehow they will hear this and decide that they're ready to maybe talk about their trauma. So the last thing, the last category of this is why, when, and how. So how do you talk about your trauma, or how do you help someone who is talking about their trauma? First thing, listen. Sounds simple. But what happens a lot of times when you're talking to someone about a traumatic event that happened to you is either they get uncomfortable and they try to change the subject. They'll bring up some platitude that they hope will make you feel better, so you'll stop talking. Or it becomes a competition of who had the most traumatic trauma. Your job when someone is telling you what happened to them, or talking about a difficult time or a painful time in their life, is just to listen. And listen without judgment. And listen without platitudes, and listen without competing. Just hear what they have to say. And if you are going to say anything, and I will say this, a lot of people who are trying to be helpful will say, oh, I get that, or oh, I understand, or and then they bring up something that is not even close to what you're talking about or isn't of the same magnitude. Losing your whole family in a house fire is not the same as losing your childhood dog when he was 16. They're both painful. They can both be traumatic, but they're not the same thing. And I think at times, a lot of people, in order to be supportive and with the most well-meaning instincts in the world, will try to draw comparisons that really aren't comparisons, or try to imply that they understand something they haven't been through and probably have no idea what it's like. And again, it's with the most well-meaning and well-intentioned and totally loving and caring intent. But I said intent and intention. It's bugging me now. But anyway, see, my brain is weird. But really all you need to do is just sit there and listen and say, I love you, or you were brave, or I'm sorry that happened to you, and no judgment and no comparing and no, cultural uncomfortableness. Just listen. Because a lot of times, if somebody chooses you to tell them about, to be the recipient of details about something traumatic that happened to them, that's a mark of huge respect. They like you. They trust you. They trust you with this damaged part of them, and they're hoping that you're going to hold it gently and treat it kindly. And it's hard when you share your trauma with someone and they don't treat it kindly and hold it gently. It's sad and it's hard. So if someone reaches out to you in that way, feel honored, because they're telling you, I'm trusting you with this can't even talk, vulnerable part of me, and I think you will treat it kindly. So that's a huge trust. Be aware of that and act as though you know that. When someone is talking about their trauma, don't compete with them. I've talked about this on other shows, and I call it the Tragedy Olympics. And I encountered this first in a group therapy group that I was in for a short time. If I remember correctly, it was for children of alcoholics, but the group was not well managed, let's put it that way. And basically what it was every week was a competition for who had the worst thing happen to them. And there was no listening, and there really wasn't a lot of therapy. It was mostly just going around the circle and everybody trying to come up with the worst thing they could come up with to top everyone else. Almost like at the end of it, the therapist was going to be the judge and stand up and hand somebody a gold medal for having the worst experience. It was the biggest waste of time, one of the biggest wastes of time that I've ever encountered. Don't compete. If someone is telling you about their trauma, they're not saying, tell me about your trauma. They're saying, this happened to me and I need you to witness it and hear it and understand it. This is not the time for you to bring out whatever thing happened to you. Don't do it. And I don't understand the impetus, I guess, to compare wounds, compare traumas as though you can beat other people out. Everybody's trauma is unique. Everybody's trauma is their own. Everybody's trauma does whatever damage it does to that particular person and their personality and their emotions and their psyche and whatever it is. It's not a competition. We can all have trauma, and we can all listen to each other talk about our traumas, and we can all support each other as we deal with those traumas. But nobody wins a gold medal for the worst trauma. They just don't. And I don't understand the whole, I guess I'm going to rephrase this a little bit. I do understand, because I was in that place once too. There is a point in dealing with trauma where you kind of want to just scoop it out of your chest and hold it out to everybody and go, look at this. Isn't this horrible? And you want everyone to say, oh, you were so brave, or, oh, you're so terrific that you got through this, or, wow, I really admire the way that you handled this. I think everybody goes through that stage because you've been hurt. And a lot of times trauma brings with it low self-esteem and issues with your personhood. So, I think we all go through that period, but hopefully you get over that. Hopefully you stop holding out your trauma and going, please give me sympathy. Please tell me I'm brave. Hopefully you do that. Now, granted, it's a stage we all have to go through, and there's nothing wrong with it. I don't think it's particularly helpful, but there's nothing wrong with it. But when it becomes a competition for, I had the worst thing happen to me, and therefore the rest of you shouldn't be whining like you're whining, then there's no value in that. It doesn't help anything. It's not helping you heal. It's not helping other people heal. Don't do it. This is not the Trauma Olympics. This is not the Tragedy Olympics. Nobody gets a gold medal for the worst story. That's it. So don't compete, especially if somebody else is opening up to you about their trauma. Don't come back at them with, well, this happened to me and blah, blah, blah. Because then neither of you are getting anywhere, and neither of you are getting what you need. So don't do it. And lastly, respect people's privacy. If someone trusts you enough, if someone is willing to share their experiences with you, whatever those experiences are, respect that is a private communication between you and them. Don't tell other people in your friend circle. Don't use it as and I know this person who did blah, 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 because honestly, that's going to feel like a betrayal. Even if you don't mean it that way, even if you have the best of intentions, it's going to feel like a betrayal. The only way that you should share a story of somebody else's trauma is if you ask them first and they give you permission. And this sounds like, again, one of those no-brainer things, but people don't always think. And sometimes you'll be in another conversation and you go, oh yeah, my friend so-and-so had this happen to him or her. And you do it with maybe the best of intentions, but it's not your story to tell. It's not unless you have asked permission and been given permission to relay the details for whatever the reason. So, and yes, I think this is, Cindy says, one of my daughter-in-law is so great on responses. Someone can give her advice or make a comment, and she so eloquently says, thank you, or I will look into that. A response can set the tone. I think that's true as well. The response that you make, and that's also part of that response has to be respecting the privacy of the person who told you whatever they told you. I think that's just a basic foundation tenet of dealing with somebody who's had a trauma, is you have to respect their privacy. They may choose to tell you. They may not be choosing to tell everyone at large yet. They may not be choosing to tell you all the details. And so you need to be aware of respecting other people's privacy, particularly if you learn about it, if you learn about their trauma from someone other than them. And that happens too, where people are gossiping. I know that happened in my case. And suddenly there's a big discussion about something that happened to you that was painful in private, and you're not part of it. And maybe what's being discussed isn't necessarily nice or accurate. So you need to be aware of that too. So honestly, I went through this a little faster than I thought I would, but I was only going to go about 45 minutes today because I've got to do the other recordings. So I'm going to show you, if you need mental health help, NAMI is a great organization, and I would highly recommend checking them out. And I certainly think that they can provide resources if you're looking for assistance with your mental health. Thank you, everybody, for watching today. Like I said, sorry this is a little shorter than normal, but honestly, I booked through that stuff. And I think we have a good overview here. Thank you all for being here. And next week, we might well have the show that I'm recording right after this one. And it'll be a great guest. And you should all be with us. And I will talk to you, or there will be a show. It might be recorded next Wednesday. Thank you. See you all soon. Bye.